Okay, everyone, let's start in 3, 2. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming here. My name is Jorge Coca, and I work at BMW in Chicago. And today I'm gonna explain why Flutter is our framework for developing mobile applications. BMW announced a public partnership with Google, in this case with the Flutter team back in a month ago or 2 months ago at We Are Developers in Berlin. So now we can talk about our experience using Flutter. But before I start talking about that, I would like to put things in perspective a little bit, because as opposed to most of the tech companies in the world, BMW or like any other car manufacturer is a little bit special, right? Like we've been around for 100 years, and that for tech is kind of like no one knows what that means actually. And we're actually in that boat, right? Like a few years ago, or like actually decades ago, building cars was actually pretty cool. We did pretty good cars, but cars nowadays look different. And the experience that you expect is totally different as well, right? Like you see the interior of a car, this is the latest 3 Series, and the levels of interaction with the vehicle, the things that you can do, the things that you can see, all the information that you see for your vehicle was something that didn't exist back in the 90s or even like at the beginning of the 2000s or something like that, right? But at the same time, the world, the vehicle industry is changing a lot, right? Like we don't know where the future is gonna be. We're talking about self-driving cars, flying cars, and we don't know how that experience, how it's gonna affect our lives, how we're gonna interact with the vehicles, right? So because of that uncertainty, like getting to the digital world for us has been like a bumpy road, right? We can kind of like try to do better. And that was what we needed or what we experienced with our mobile applications. We had mobile applications out there, but clearly we can do better. We needed a digital transformation, right? So one day, my boss came to me, to my desk, kind of like, hey, good morning. By the way, we want to do new clients, and our goal should be that we want to release regularly on a cadence that is predictable all our products across all the brands that we have. It's not only BMW, we have Mini, Motorrad, Rolls-Royce, right? And in all the regions in the world, and this is a big challenge that I explain later, with the same feature capabilities. So that's great. Your boss comes to you and is like, great, we can do that. And you want to cry after that because it's a big challenge, right? It means kind of like all the foundation, all the ideas that were established, you have to shake them and challenge them again, right? So for us, how does that look? How does that challenge look? First of all, we have multiple brands, right? Like we're not only working on a single application and we're done. We have BMW, we have Mini, Motorrad, Rolls-Royce. I think there's a few other, but like these are the most known brands. And at the same time, we're working about very highly regulated markets, right? Like we're talking about vehicles. That's something that is not to take lightly. And it depends on where you are in the world. Being a vehicle or a vehicle as a device means something different. It's not the same thing being in Italy, that being in China, that being in the US, right? Like that vehicle experience, the level of infrastructure, the level of security, or like where the data lives is totally different. And because of that, we are actually forced to have teams distributed all around the world, right? In my case, I work in Chicago. My office is located in Chicago, but we have multiple offices in the US, multiple offices in Europe, Germany being the headquarters, Asia, you name it, right? And at the same time, our mobile applications, they go through very high detail security requirements and audits, right? At the end of the day, with your phone, if you can control your vehicle, you want to make sure that you have full control and a secure control over what you do. And finally, fragmentation. And you think that fragmentation when it comes to Android is like, oh my God, this is the end of the world. Well, add vehicles to the equation, right? And for us, we see vehicles as a device. And the amount of vehicles that we have and the difference between these vehicles, it's big, big difference because it's not the same tech stack that you have in a vehicle from 2005 than in a vehicle from 2015 than in a vehicle in 2019, right? So you add all of that information to the equation, and it's a pretty interesting challenge. So the first thing that we decided to do was, okay, what do we know? What can we do better from our past, right? So we started with, are we happy with our APIs at any level, right? We're not just talking about REST APIs, but like, are our SDKs easy to use? Are our feature APIs easy to use? What can we do better? We also were in a position where, as a mobile developer, I don't want to say no to my designers. They're brilliant. And one of the things that puts BMW in a separate bucket than the other vehicle manufacturers is like the attention to detail, the level of design experience that you can get, right? Like, you're paying a lot of money for these vehicles, so you want to get everything out of it, right? So we don't want to say no to designers. As a team also, and in my case, I was leading the Android team before, I was very frustrated about the lack of visibility that I had over some of our other infrastructure at BMW. I was like, I want to have teams that are independent, that are autonomous, that they can have full control over the entire tech experience, right? So in that case, we decided to try to turn our teams into full stack teams. So this idea of the Android team and all the stuff, kind of like we can erase it a little bit or just work on platform teams and then feature teams, that would be great. And another thing that we wanted to understand better is like, we were so focused on like, oh, we're engineers, we know better than anyone, that we actually didn't understand our business goals. And the business goals for BMW are very well defined, but as engineers, there was a gap. I don't know if it was communication or like ways of working, but we wanted to fix that. We wanted to work closely with all the business units at BMW. And finally, we wanted to have shorter feature cycle times, right? For us, it was very, very painful that every time we wanted to put a release, because of all these challenges and information and security audits, we would go every 4 months. No one likes that. It makes everything very, very risky. So we want to avoid that, right? So with this information in mind, well, and kind of like as an overview, in general, based on that information, you might be thinking for yourself, like, why do you work then at BMW? Well, it's pretty cool, but we had some challenges here and there, but we wanted to improve our developer experience overall, right? That's something that we had the opportunity to rethink, to challenge, and to try to improve it. So with this past experience, the next thing is like, okay, we know that we can improve in these areas. How can we improve? What are our goals, right? And we defined our engineering vision. And it's very, very kind of like simple, and it has all the buzzwords, but this is what changed our mentality at BMW. We wanted to create a platform. That's very important. We're not talking about a simple application just for BMW or Mini. No, we want to create a platform, and then based on that, we can cut different brands and whatever we need, right? But first of all, that it's developer friendly. And this is very, very important because I want developers to be able to touch the code in a way that for them, it's kind of like, oh, this is actually very nice to touch. I know what I have to change. I don't need to go through a headache or anything like that. And at the same time, that it's developer scalable, right? So because of our regulations with markets, with different teams across the world, we want to make sure that we can handle having 10 engineers on the team or 100 engineers on the team. We want to be performant. And of course, everyone wants to be performant, but how do you achieve that? By measuring, right? By having a reference, and based on that, you can improve. And finally, we want to provide safe experimentation and continuous deployment. Safe experimentation because of all our different markets. The application looks totally different in China than in the US, right? The integrations that you might have are totally different. In the US, we can partner with Google or Amazon. In China, you want to partner with Alibaba, right? So all those things, we need to provide frameworks in place that hide kind of like the difficulty or like the complexity of the challenge. And finally, being able to continuously deploy what we need. And then it's up to business to decide what they want to put on the store, not because we as engineers say like, we're not ready. So based on this, the developer experience in 2018 was a little bit painful, right? We have divergent architectures. We had our iOS teams. We had our Android teams, but there was definitely more iOS than Android developers. And we were not talking the same language. And I'm not talking about, oh, you guys were using Swift and we're talking about Kotlin. No, we're talking about foundational architecture level in the application. up to a point where like for the same problem that we had to solve in both platforms, the implementations would totally be different. The level of requirements when it comes to quality, formatting, linting, testing were totally different. And we were tired of that. Android, I was working on the Android project, we were always releasing after iOS. It's like iOS first, and then let's figure out Android. And as engineers, even the iOS engineers, they were tired of having Android as the follower, right? We didn't see the value in that. It wasn't bringing any business value or engineering value, so we wanted to challenge that as well. And because of this, we wanted to break the platform silos, right? Like I want to work together with my iOS teammates. They're actually really nice people most of the time. No, that's not true. But like we wanted to work together and collaborate together and forget that we're working on Android and iOS. We're working on the mobile platform, right? Because of these different architectures and experiences and way of solving problems, we didn't have friendly APIs. They were anything but predictable. Think about like, oh, I want to get the list of vehicles. Good luck. There was nothing in our APIs that said get vehicles, for example. So all of this led to very frustrating experiences within the development team, within the business team, within the designing team, but also for our users ultimately. So what did we do?
Does it get rid of Xcode? If you use Flutter, is there no Xcode dependency?
If you work on native side, yes, but let's save questions for later. So what we did is like to try to go and change this idea of like, oh, we have the Android team and the iOS team and the backend team. And let's put together a core team that has every vertical of the technology stack that we use represented with this team. And that's how we're gonna build our core foundational technology stack, right? So we have teams working on Angular. We had teams working on Android. We had teams working on backend, microservices, cloud infrastructure, and teams working on iOS. So we got representatives from all these areas, put them together in a team for a period of 6 months. And we were like, okay, now we have to decide what's the future of technology at BMW. So this is my team back when we started. It looks a little bit different now, but we were having a lot of fun. I don't want to talk about my belly, but pretty much back in March 2018, when we started this exploration, this is the technology solutions that we explore. We started with Xamarin. We're a big partner of Microsoft. If you see all the build conferences from Microsoft, there's always someone from BMW talking. But after many conversations with them, we realized that Xamarin wasn't the right fit for us for many, many different reasons. But pretty much we said, okay, we cannot go with Xamarin. Granted that we know what was the experience of just going full native, so I'm not saying that we were not considering like full native. It's just like, this is what we initially decided to test. We also tried React Native. And if you saw the slide before, we had representatives of Angular. We have some experience of working with web apps on mobile and bridging the web views in Android and iOS to make the Angular web apps work. So that idea of bridge wasn't very appealing to any of the members of the team. The Angular teams, they had very frustrating experiences with bridge platforms, and that's pretty much React Native. And as native developers, I didn't want to write another bridge. So that's one of the reasons why we decided not to go with React Native. Then we transitioned to something called Uberribs. And this is not a cross-platform framework. It's a cross-architecture framework. So pretty much you still write your code in Kotlin or Swift, but you maintain the same architecture. So it's like, okay, we don't mind that, but like at least we can talk about the same architecture and things like that. And then we tried Flutter. And Flutter was interesting. Like, okay, everything is a widget. You build your application composing widgets and things like that, right? So we tried all these frameworks, and our winner was Ribs. What? You guys came here to see Flutter, right? Surprise. We were actually very, very excited about the potential of Ribs. And by the way, Ribs stands for Router Interactor Builder. But yeah, pretty much we were like, what, right? So what happened to Flutter back in 2018? It was, for us, like just another cross-platform framework. And I think mentally we were not ready for that. Granted that there was a big majority of native developers in the team. So I think we saw those frameworks initially as like, we don't need that, right? We were already biased by the technology. Also, we were like, really, what is Flutter? It's not even on beta, and who uses it? And Dart, what, another language? So we were kind of like, whatever. They didn't have support for Google Maps at that point, and hey, we're VNW, we rely on maps like big time, right? So that was a big like, oh, I don't know, that already kind of like discards Flutter by itself. And finally, like, who uses Flutter? Like, we saw like, oh yeah, the Hamilton app, which by the way, great musical, and I loved it, but like we were like, oh yeah, just the Hamilton app and Google this or that or whatever. So those were our reasons to kind of like discard Flutter from our technology choices. What did we like about Ribs at that time? First of all, this diagram. Ribs is all based on states and the way you describe your application. So in this case, this would be the procedure. You see how it changes from steps to steps about just getting on a ride with Uber, right? You go from the root tree, that's how you describe your application. You're logged in or logged out, and then you're on a request or on a trip. And this visual representation of the architecture is incredibly powerful, not only for developers. Now I can go to my product manager and say like, you know, this is happening when I kind of like attach this part of the tree to the architecture, or I detach it, that's where my leak is, right? And on top of that, this tree is all based on composition, meaning that I can take a branch and part of the application will still work without that branch. So that enables your development for feature toggles, for working on isolation these features, modularization, crazy things like that, that for us, we know that that's what we needed, right? And pretty much every time you create a rib, it looks something like this. You have your router, your interactor, and your builder. Those are the three main components of ribs. And then you have these optional things that are presenter and views in case your node within that tree has a view associated, right? We're talking all about business logic, and then the UI comes second. So with all this, it's like, okay, we like it. We at least solve the problem of breaking the silos. Our iOS and Android teams can work together. They share the architecture. Not only that, it's super like visual in your face, and you can actually get a visual representation of that architecture at runtime. So that's great to understand the project and give visibility of how it works, right? It's based on aggressive composition. Like it's like the way you build that tree is all composing ribs together. And that's great because now you can attach and detach and move to a different state very, very easily. It helps you to develop these features in isolation. And I think one thing that is brilliant about what they did is like they created IDE tools for Xcode and Android Studio to generate like all the boilerplate for you. So you could create a rib with a view or without a view, just give it a name. It will generate all the boilerplate for you, and you just kind of like fill the gaps, right? So that made it very interesting. And you could use Kotlin and Swift, so thumbs up, we were super happy. So back at that time, I actually even started creating this repository called Uberribs Awesome Resources, where I was collecting information of companies, blogs, open source applications that they were using this architecture pattern, right? We were very happy. I actually love that architecture. I know some people at Uber, they actually love it, especially the ones that they created it. But after some time, we realized that, hey, now that we've solved these challenges, we're actually doing the same thing twice. And not only in code, but in Jira, in the test suite, in the release program, and all the stuff, right? So we're kind of like, yeah, we've solved this problem, and we're still like, now we're getting to a place, but like, we're missing something. And one of the challenges that we didn't understand at that time, and we started to understand with this new platform, was that our UI design language, what VNW wants for their applications to look, is actually not material or not like iOS related. Like at VNW, we have our own design language, and it's very strong, right? So we were trying to create these UI libraries within Android, within iOS, that they were in some cases overriding what the platform was giving you just because we wanted to have that VNW feeling, that mini feeling, right? And that's very important because this is actually one of the game changers for Flutter that I'll talk a little bit later. And again, like we started like seeing all these duplicated efforts, and the moment that you see yourself creating GitHub plugins, so when your program manager creates a story and it directly goes to the backend of Android and iOS, you know that you're duplicating things, right? So after being super happy, super excited, and ringing all the bells about Ribs, we had to go back and tell the business, we need more time. We want to try Flutter again. And I think that back in March of 2018, we actually didn't understand the full potential of Flutter. Maybe Flutter wasn't fully ready for us either, right? But we needed some time to know each other. So what happened back when we decided that we needed more time? We were actually excited about the idea of another cross-platform development. We saw what happened at Google I/O 2018. They announced beta. More applications were kind of popping, right? And we saw the potential of that UI framework. It was beautiful, crazy animations and things like that. And we saw the code of some of these applications, and we were like, hey, this is great. And that idea of what is Flutter and what is Dart, we realized that Dart is actually incredibly simple, up to a point where you don't say, I have to learn Dart. You already know Dart. What? That blows my mind, but it's a super familiar language. You don't need to spend a lot of time. If you've done Java, you know Dart pretty much. If you've done Swift, or you know Dart, believe me, it's just not, it's natural. And Flutter, what we like about that aggressive composition of ribs, it's actually what Flutter is all about. It's all about composing widgets together. So the same visual representation that we had it also with Flutter. So it was like a win-win, right? There was no support for Google Maps, but we talked to Google and we work it out. And who uses it? An awesome community, and this gives us the opportunity to actually change even our visibility within the community at BMW, and I'll talk about it in a second, but it was just very refreshing to understand that, well, you maybe don't need big names. What you need is passionate people working on the platform. So what is Flutter? Up to that point, you understand that we made the switch to Flutter, right? So Flutter is just a UI portable toolkit. It's all about the UI, right? Pretty much, like in Android, what they do is they take ownership of the activity, so you still have your Android activity, but then based on that, you can paint on top of that. So that's how they work on iOS with a view controller. That's how they work in web, taking ownership of the DOM, right? It renders at 60 frames per second. And not only that, you can measure that, and we'll see that in a second. Everything is a widget. No more crazy activities, fragments, life cycles, view controllers, view did load on create, and what's my saved instance state. Everything is a widget, and the APIs are super, super simple to use. And because of this composition, working on the UI, it's actually a delight. And on top of that, the tooling that you get out of the box. It comes with its own linter, debugger. You can use VS Code if you want. You can use Android Studio if you want. You have observatory. It's really, really interesting. And you don't have to recompile. Okay, you run the application for the first time. You have the opportunity to change your widgets and see how it changes on the device. And hot reload sounds like, oh my God, but after you grow your code base to 1,000,000 lines of code, it's gonna fail. I can tell you already that it doesn't. Our code base is pretty big and it still works like the first day. And they do that by having crazy, well, not crazy, but all the compilation framework behind Dart is what allows Flutter to have this hot reload. So overall, Flutter is I like to say Picasso. Picasso, I'm sure everyone knows it, is a Spanish painter, one of the best painters that we have in Spain. And I like to say that with Flutter, you can paint anywhere, right? We're talking about Android, iOS, the web, anywhere, as long as you tell it what to paint. So how does it do that? Well, this is a lot of technical blogs and modules and things like that, but pretty much it takes the best of the Chrome rendering engine and takes all the pieces that are not necessary, and pretty much it leaves you with a Skia, that's the rendering engine. And then with the Skia, now you can start painting your widgets. So it's based on a Chrome project initially. What about Dart? Well, the Dart team and the Flutter teams, they sit together, and you can tell that because Dart is optimized for building UIs. All the syntactic sugar that they've been adding lately is to make Flutter development a really beautiful experience, right? And you could run it pretty much on every platform where you install the Dart VM. It feels very natural and familiar. You don't have to learn it. You probably know it already. You just don't know. But in case you have to learn it, it's very easy to learn. Although there are some features that are missing, especially if you're coming from the Kotlin world, you can say goodbye for now to data classes or sealed classes. There's no coroutines, but they have a different concurrency methodology. In this case, it's all based on feature APIs and async awaits. So for those doing web, like TypeScript, it's kind of like promises. And the model running concurrency is like the one that you can find in Node. It's all based on event loops, right? And an isolate-based concurrency model. So why Dart in this case? Why the Flutter team decided to choose Dart? Well, because thanks to hot reload, now you don't need to recompile, and that's something that the JVM compiler doesn't offer you, right? It's a very low-level decision that's what allows you to have these feature cycle developments being so fast. You can compile your code to ARM, or machine code. So it's compiled code. It's as opposed to React Native and JavaScript, where we're talking about like having that bridge and being interpreted at runtime. In this case, you can compile it. You get a binary. And it supports ahead of time compilation and just-in-time compilation, right? These are the reasons why Flutter decided to use Dart. On top of that, you get incredibly modern tools, right? You can profile it, you can debug it like the usual, but it's very powerful. You get lint, the analyzer, you get observatory, so you can see that widget tree at real time. So it's really, really nice. So how does Dart look actually? Because I've been telling you that it's very simple to use. Let's take a look to a snippet of code, right? Like this is a normal, like very simple code where you make a network call. So you start having your return type of a feature or void. In this case, we're just printing to the terminal. And because you're returning a feature, you want to make it asynchronous, right? And you're going to get the response from an HTTP call, a get method to weather.com, and you're going to wait for the response. This means like, hey, I'm going to get the results not immediately, just a little bit later. Just wait for this, right? That's the future async await API. You get a string interpolation once you get the response and you want to print it. Just use the $, open brackets, and response body, and that's what's going to call the toString of this object, right? And if you need to throw an exception, do this. This is the kind of like making things easier for the developers that I was talking about. What happened about maps at that time? Well, we talked to Google about it, right? BMW gives you some kind of like nice advantages sometimes, and they told us like, hey, don't worry, we don't have it yet, but we're working on it. And actually good news, all the packages are being developed in the open, right? So if you go to the Flutter repository, you can see that not only Google Maps, but all the Firebase integrations, Google Analytics, all the stuff is being done in the open. And for us, we realized that we didn't need maps immediately. We were just starting our project in August. So we can wait, and actually we can work with Google Maps, in this case, or to any other map providers to kind of like change those APIs in a way that works for us as well. And in case you want to do it, you can also do it as well. There's this idea of platform channels that lets you communicate with the native side. So if you want to talk to a native SDK from Android and iOS, you can achieve that doing this. So it was a matter of who's going to do the work, not like, oh, it's impossible to do, right? What about the community and the support? That was the last item in our list of saying like, should we use Flutter or not? Well, the Flutter community, I think it deserves a special mention. It's super welcoming. It's very vibrant right now, right? Like, feels like everyone wants to participate. And that means more knowledge, more meetups, more networking, more packages, more maturity. That also gave me the opportunity to start the Chicago Flutter meetup. And this is one of the changes that we see now at BMW thanks to Flutter. We're being active in the community. This involved a lot of like talkings with like our legal department and things like that because it's something new. But now BMW has been sponsoring this meetup. We sponsored the Hack 19 event that was done worldwide, right? So this is giving us a presence in the community that we didn't have before. The Flutter documentation is really, really good. In my opinion, a bit better than the one that you can find for Android. We're talking before in the keynote about the life cycle diagrams and all the stuff. Maybe because the APIs are easier, the documentation is also easier, but like you can just go do one tutorial and you feel like you know everything. And it's because it's very easy to learn, it's very easy to catch up. And more apps are being developed now with Flutter, not only like at Google internally and externally, but we're talking about Hamilton, Reflectly, Alibaba, now us being a partner, right? And Groupon, many others that probably you don't even know. But also it comes with other benefits, right? Like for us, we said that that idea of the visual architecture, that idea of having your UI represented as a tree was very powerful, and we love that. We also had the option of having multiple state management solutions. So if you feel familiar with Redux, there's a Redux implementation. If you feel familiar with Model View Model, probably there's another one. I think now they're talking about MoveX and I don't know, you name it, they have it. It also gives us 3 levels of testing without having to introduce third-party applications or libraries like JUnit or Roboelectric or Espresso, right? Testing is part of the framework, and it's super easy to test. And for us, that is incredibly important because the only way we can ensure safe experimentation is actually by testing, right? And that, if you remember, was one of the core goals that we defined for our future experiences. So having this unit testing, widget testing, and integration test out of the box, it's super beneficial. So in general, Flutter inspired us to transform how we work, how we operate at BMW, right? From top, business, leadership, to bottom, engineers, designers, business units, everyone, right? We try to be more open about what we do, and we publish a lot of articles in medium.com for the Flutter community. You'll see, in my case, myself, I have another teammate, Felix Angelov, that has been very, very active. He deserves all the love in the world because it's amazing. But yeah, if you go to Flutter Community, you will see a lot of the things that we've been doing in there. We also open a GitHub organization, and you might be thinking like, wow, incredible, that everyone does it. No, we didn't. But thanks to Flutter, we started pushing our legal department, say like, hey, we need to have presence in the open source world. We need to share with the community what we're doing. We're solving problems that no one else has solved yet, so let's share that. So these are just a few packages that we open source since then. I'll talk about a few of them in a second. Because now I want to tell you about a little bit how we use Flutter. In particular, I want to talk about a few things. Our integrations with our backends, how we manage our states, the overall architecture of our project. I'm not saying that this is the perfect architecture, I'm saying that it works for us. It's helping us to grow, scale, and have as many developers as we want, so it's a good fit for us. And also I wanna talk about like how we ensure or how we do our testing and automation, right? How we provide safe experimentation and continuous delivery. So when it comes to the backend, we already talked about having full stack teams, right? So now I can participate in the design of APIs just because we decided to introduce intermediate layers that it's very known as a pattern called backend for frontends. But ultimately our goal was to remove the decision logic from the clients, right? If we can make our clients as thin, as passive as possible, the better, because we don't have crazy algorithms or anything like that. Most of the times it's just showing data on a screen that we get from a network call. Again, we apply this technique of backend for frontend, so even if one of the APIs that we receive from a third-party vendor or whatever gets complicated, we can try to make it work for our benefits in this backend for frontend layer. And thanks to that, we can move actually all our feature flags from the clients. Most of them, we can move them now to the backend, and just based on what the backend tells us to render, we can show and hide these features, right? So the overall architecture would look something like this. We would have what we call the raw data layer. Very simple. Just get raw data from your GPS, HTTP client, database, whatever. Compose that in your domain layer or repository layers. That's kind of like your feature cut. And finally, on the UI layer is where we inject this repository and we show the information. talking about state management and trying to be open, I wrote this article about, let me help you to understand and choose your state management solutions. And I recommended something that I regret that I recommended. Bottom line, I was saying, choose something that works for you, but I said like, oh, use Blog for local state and use Redux for global state. What does that mean? Like, there's no global and local state or anything like that. So we don't use Redux anymore. We remove it from the code base, and instead we use Flutter Blog. This is a library that one of my teammates, Felix, the one that I was talking before, put together, has like thousands of stars in GitHub, and it's very, very simple, and we love to use it. It's what's helping us to grow as a team and be predictable. So how does it work? It's inspired by the mobile view intent, typical that you see in Android applications coming, and from the blog pattern that Google promotes, but pretty much means like take the business logic out of the UI and make it predictable, right? So by making it predictable means that every action on the UI side, the user tap a button or you're presenting a page, has a reaction on your business logic. So, and based on that, we can automate because we have these predictable flows. So this very common example of, oh, let's do a counter with blog. How does it look in code? Well, your blog will start with initial state, 0, that's your counter, right? And then you just get this idea of map each event that you receive to a state that you're gonna push to the UI. So in this case, if you receive a decrement, you just decrease your current state to 1 from 1 point, sorry. Or if you receive an increment, you just increment your current state, right? And then in the UI, it's very simple. You create your stateless widget, you get your reference to the blog, you start listening to the states with the blog builder, and pretty much render the state that you receive. And to dispatch states back to the blog, you have this dispatch method, so you can pass the event that you wanna do. We also combine it with this library that we open source called Lambert. Lambert is very simple, it's just a logger. But if you see the first line, it starts with a client. And that's the powerful thing about Lambert, because with Lambert, we have a simple client, just print to the terminal. We have a colorized client, print colorized logs. Or we can send these reports back to Sentry or to Firebase. Or if you want to add your own plugin, go for it, right? So because of this, in our blog, we can say like every transition or every error, just log it with Lambert. And because we set up the client at the beginning based on our flavor, region, or whatever, we can report to these different systems, right? So by the combination of these two with a developer effort, we can get all these analytics, all these error traces, all these logs in the backend in an automated way, and we don't have to work anymore on analytics and how many times the user tapped this button. We have registered that already. About testing and automation, what do we do? First of all, automate it. We don't want to have engineers thinking about, I'm going to test manually this feature. No. We're done with that, right? We get 3 levels of testing, as we said before, unit, widget, and integration testing. And the standard that we set by ourselves, or for ourselves, is that we need 100% coverage. I know that this doesn't mean anything. This doesn't mean that you don't have bugs, but we needed to choose a number, so we like 100 rather than 90%. This is kind of like, I've tried to remove all the things that are proprietary, but like, this is one of our automated pipelines from when we started the project. So at the left, you can see that we analyze, we check the formatting of the project, we get the visual architecture representation, then we test all the different modules, and then we distribute at the end, right? This is the kind of thing that we want to do in the pipelines. It's to not to have to do it manually. On top of that, we have this library called OC.Flutter that we wrote, that during integration test, you can capture screenshots of your project, but not only that. In a second, it will go to a different tab, and you can get performance reports. So green means good, red means bad. So that's great. You can measure your 60 frames per second to see if that is happening or not, right? How does that look in code? Very easy. You get your setup all, get an instance of OC, generate your HTML report at the end of the test in the teardown all, and then when you execute the test, just start your test with profile the performance if you want to get a performance report, and take screenshots, as many as you want, right? And it will put it at the end of the HTML report. those are pretty much like a good overview of how we use these tools. I'm almost done with the talk. I have 2 minutes left, so I'm gonna do a little bit of self-promotion because I'm actually writing a book. My mom is very excited about it. It's called Dart in Action, Dart 2 in Action, and it's gonna be published by Manning Publications. So it's just kind of like your usual like how to learn Dart, right? So there's gonna be projects and things like that. It's gonna be soon in early access preview. That means that I have finished 5 chapters, and you can get those 5 chapters. And if I write the 6th one, you will get the 6th one on the email, things like that, right? But if you're also interested, Manning has a Flutter in Action book that it's pretty good. Also, I'm gonna be talking in Droidcon, New York. It's August 26 and 27. The reason why I'm mentioning that is because the talk at Droidcon is gonna be a follow-up of this one. It's gonna be Flutter at scale, and I'm gonna be talking about more in detail about how we use Flutter. This one is why we use it, and all the tools that I was mentioning before, like the testing, I'm gonna go much more in detail. So if you have any questions, comments, feedback, Twitter is the best place. You can reach me out at jcocaramos, or also follow the Chicago Flutter Community. I manage that Twitter account as well. If you wanna check all the VNW cool stuff, go to the VNW Tech repository. If you check my website, I put the coffee emoji because I have something called Coffee Fridays remotely, or if you're in Chicago, just check the calendar, put yourself, and if you have any Flutter questions, I'm willing to help. And finally, these slides are in the speaker deck under my name, Jorge Coca, Our Journey to Flutter. I finished on time. Thank you so much.